this is the big long video, an entire seminar and free consult on my deep winter cold climate passive solar greenhouse, the design, construction, things I would have done differently, as well as all of your questions asked. So you were asked to submit any questions. That was your opportunity to have them answered, and I'm going to cover everything. So from climate battery, geothermal systems, construction insulation, the south end glazing, comparing it to different types of greenhouses, air exchange, vapor pressure deficits, high humidity, thermal heat storage, etc. So buckle up, we'll see how long this takes. All right, so just a brief overview of my deep winter cold climate passive solar greenhouse. So I live in Saskatchewan, Canada, which is pretty much smack dab heart in the middle of Canada. It is very cold in the winter, cold and dry, and also hot in the summer, I guess. So we're latitude 52 degrees north, 106 degrees west. Our summer solstice is 61 degree sun angle, and our winter solstice is 14 degree very low angle of the sun. But where I live, it's one of the sunnier places in Canada. There's sunnier places. Some of the sunniest places are in Alberta, like Calgary has about 333 sunny days a year. Where I live, it is 319 sunny days a year. This is gardening zone 3, and we essentially can't grow food outside for 8 months of the year. So that's why I put a high importance on this deep winter greenhouse. Now, I knew when building this thing that I didn't want high ongoing costs. So with very, very little and probably eventually no additional fuel, this includes firewood and or natural gas, I want to keep this thing 10 degrees Celsius or warmer for the tropical plants, like all of my banana trees, orange tree behind me with oranges on it, things like that. I have to keep it 10 degrees Celsius or warmer. So the concept of this greenhouse is, number one, the most important part of any building other than the design and situating it properly for passive solar gain, is insulation. I don't care what you do, insulation is number one. So in my building, I put R, and R value is the resistance value that measures the amount of insulation and keeping the heat or the cold out, right? So if you're not familiar with that, but up in my vaulted roof is R60 insulation, R60 insulation. In my walls is R48 insulation. And under the perimeter of the greenhouse, 4 feet underground, I put there's about R60 insulation 4 feet down, as well as our frost line, they say goes 4 feet down, but actually I've seen it myself excavating in the winter go down as far as 12 feet, the frost. So the ground is quite a bit cooler as well as going down the perimeter with 4 feet of insulation. Around the perimeter, I put at surface and out of the greenhouse around the perimeter of my house, shop, and buildings. This prevents frost from creeping down to that. So essentially, my big buildings, I'll coin this term, I call it passive geothermal. So it's a big footprint, highly insulated, and keeping all of the elements out, including the frost underground. So in my greenhouse, I did not do a climate battery, what they call. So what some greenhouse people put in is, they call it a climate battery. So that's taking warm air from the top peak of a side of a greenhouse, pumping it with a fan underground in weeping tile in an S pattern, and putting that in sand or rock or just earth, and then bringing that up the other side of the greenhouse. So their theory is that all summer long, when it's hotter in the greenhouse, they have that and they're charging this climate battery, and then all winter it's released. Now, I don't think that works anywhere near as good as they say that it does. So there's some stuff about sand batteries, climate batteries. For example, today it is sunny outside. I have one door open. It is minus 35 degrees Celsius outside, which is about, for your Fahrenheit people, minus 30 something degrees Fahrenheit. And later today, with a couple doors just open a sliver, it's going to get to plus 35 Celsius in here, which is about 95 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take. So that's a massive temperature differential. So in Celsius, like a 70 degrees Celsius natural temperature differential, and in Fahrenheit, that's about 140 degree natural temperature differential, which is huge. So that climate battery system, I could see a slight bit of benefits inter-day. So it's a sunny day. You get rid of some of that heat, put it underground, and it'll charge the ground and also cool the air a little bit. And then at night, pull a little bit of that and bring it up. But I've seen guys monitoring the temperature, that the difference they get from one end to the other end is so minuscule. I thought one benefit that would have would be reducing humidity. That is, it doesn't do very much. But so here's a term, like I'm going to coin a couple terms today, passive geothermal. So it is so cold here that the ground temperature outside is like freezing. You'd have to go down very deep, and the benefit that you get out of that, is not very good. So the oranges in the snow video with that old fellow in Nebraska that built a greenhouse. So he doesn't have a climate battery underneath, but what he did is he did tubes outside, underground in long trenches, and brings in fresh air into the greenhouse and then exhausts that air out of the greenhouse. So there's no climate battery, but his ground temperature is above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, because Nebraska would be like a walk in the park compared to Saskatchewan. So, but the benefit that I didn't realize, because he didn't talk about any of that in the video, and I'm not sure if he realizes this, but he's getting fresh or air from outside, and he's exchanging air in the greenhouse all the time. So the climate battery people aren't exchanging any air. They're pulling air from one high part of the greenhouse underground, only essentially for heat. That doesn't work as good as they say it does. Mine always spend the money on insulation, and then because my climate controlled environment in a high efficient building is just inside, it's just passively geothermal. The ground's like constant temperature. So for example, right now it's middle of February, but in January, like the coldest month of the year, we're germinating seeds in the ground in the greenhouse, like germinating. Anything we want, we plant a seed and it germinates. The ground isn't cold. So how the earth works, the earth is constantly pulling heat down. So if I hooked up my in-floor heat in my concrete, it's going to just pull it down. The earth, because the earth is colder than the surface, so it's just constantly pulling down, and it's kind of charging but also pulling heat out of the building. But that's passively just geothermal, right? Just naturally. And because I'm protected from the elements with that super insulation, it's just passive geothermal. To put air tubes down and spend all that money, you'd get some benefit, but I don't think it's anywhere close to the benefit that they say it does. For an example, some of the people I've seen putting a climate battery, which is the air tubes underneath their greenhouse, they do not use the greenhouse, in the winter in Canada in better environments than I do, because it doesn't work as good as they say it does. So I will never put anyone down, but I just want to do actually comparisons to things. So both, I'll put myself down where needed, and you know what I mean? When somebody's innovating or an entrepreneur, never ever put them down. But I did a seminar with Verge permaculture on their thing to explain a little bit of my greenhouse. And, let's call it the Verge Permaculture Greenhouse that he built, passive solar greenhouse. There's a little bit of issues with it, I guess. So they spent all the money and time on this climate battery, but he told me they don't use it for 3 months of the year in winter, right? They let the greenhouse freeze. So mine, I've got bananas in here. Now, mind you, I use a little bit of firewood at night, and actually I've been so busy, natural gas. I'll talk about my bills for heating shortly here. But so there's a climate battery. I've seen people put a climate battery in a hoop house with no insulation. I've seen people spend the money on this climate battery with a glorified hoop house with like a thin layer of foil insulation. Curtis Stone, I'd never ever put him down, but I like my design better for a variety of different reasons. All these guys, they don't have insulation up where heat rises, because for me, the sun's at an angle like this. The sun never comes in here. And in the summer, the sun's at an angle like this. So in my design, heat rises. In their design, it's just like polycarbonate or poly or a double layer poly. Heat rises and they're losing all their heat out there, as well as in the summertime. They're blasted by the sun, and I couldn't imagine how hot it is in there. Whereas my design, it's cooler in the greenhouse than it is outside in the summertime, because half of it's shaded. Half of my in-ground bed behind me is shaded, which means in the summertime I can still do spinaches and lettuces and other low light things in full shade or just a tiny bit of sun, morning and evening or whatever. But polycarbonate refracts the light as well. So polycarbonate, the sun hits polycarbonate and the light goes like this. Glass would reflect some light and it wouldn't refract like polycarbonate. So even though it's partially shaded, I do get lots of natural light, just not direct sunlight in the summertime. And then in the summertime, no fans going, opened up just my windows and doors and an overhead door at the back. It's cooler in here than it is outside. There's the glazing on the top where you don't need it. They have full sun in the summer, but it would be scorching hot in there. And then in the wintertime, you're losing all the heat because heat goes up. Okay. But again, Curtis Stone, again, don't ever put anyone down, but that's something I like about my design better than theirs. And then these guys that put the climate battery in, Curtis Stone isn't really growing in there in the dead of winter, right? They kind of let it have a freeze cycle or whatever. And whereas I don't, I'm able to keep it like this. Now the Nebraska greenhouse, oranges in the snow one. So no climate battery, but he's pulling in air from the outside and minimal insulation. And it's just polycarbonate, not a double layer, because Nebraska is like a walk in the park. I think it gets to -9 or something in the wintertime, whereas we get to -40 Celsius. So -9 Celsius in Nebraska, I think. But anyways, it's warmer. So our ground temperature, like I said, the frost goes down way far. The ground is way cooler than Nebraska. There he's pulling outside air, preheating it before it comes and naturally ventilates the greenhouse. So a benefit from what he does, again, is he's getting that outside air, which solves an air exchange problem. So what he actually did is it's not a climate battery, it's an air exchanger that essentially preheats the air. The climate battery people that don't bring in fresh air, they're trying to charge the earth a little bit better just with air and earth. So mine's passive geothermal for heating. So naturally, the ground in here is never going to freeze. It's going to be warmer. I can germinate seeds in the ground, and I don't have expensive excavating and air tubes. However, one thing I might have done for heating, I haven't even hooked up my hydronic heating yet. So I have in-floor heat in my concrete pipes, and then I just have natural fish tanks and water storage, and now a hot tub, and I'm going to be having some more fish tanks, so I'm going to have a lot of water. Water is the best heat transfer mechanism over everything else, over sand, over earth, over wood, over air. It's way, way more. So I've heard lots of talks about a sand battery. Sand battery, it would take more energy to heat up sand, but then it would release slower. But water is the fastest heat transfer, and it is very versatile. So for example, if you are planning on doing a wood boiler, you can integrate the heat from the wood boiler into water. You can't do it, or it's not very good to do it with air, and it's not very good to do it with sand. If I put evacuated solar tubes, which is still the plan, on top of the greenhouse, that's water and very versatile. I can store that in great big insulated water tanks, all that thermal energy, and because it takes less energy to heat up water and it heats up faster, it's going to release faster. So this is for intraday stuff. So water is the best heat transfer mechanism. The more water you have in the greenhouse, and water heating, hydronic heating is the best type, so over air. So I put the in-floor heat in the concrete. Somebody in Alberta came here and visited me. I won't mention their name, but they built my almost exact greenhouse just to my from the specs on my YouTube video. So that was really cool. But he came out and visited me. I talked to him for a couple hours. Yeah, same thing as me, but what he did is put some extra sand underneath the concrete and some additional hydronic heating in that sand, so he has a little bit more thermal mass because of more water and then more sand and gravel. And he happened to have cheap or free local or like sand on his property, so that was good for him, whereas I'd have to buy sand to doing that. But essentially, any more water, any more sand, any more concrete, any more bricks, any more thermal mass in the interior of a greenhouse, a house, a shop, anything is better, okay? But water is my favorite. It's the most versatile, and I can, for example, my fish tanks at the back, when I do hook up the hydronic heating, I'll go on another tangent, but I have brook trout and tilapia. So brook trout, I'm at the high end of temperatures still, and tilapia, I'm at the low end of temperatures in the winter. In the summertime, tilapia are going to be perfect, and brook trout are going to struggle. So I'm going to put these brook trout in my pond in the spring and keep tilapia. But tilapia in the winter, I don't want to be heating water with electricity. So when I integrate my hydronic heating, I'm going to, into the sump tank for all the fish tanks, integrate the water-to-water air exchanger so I can heat the fish tank water, which is thermal mass for the greenhouse, so that I can raise tilapia because they need a warmer temperature. But that's the idea. So water is very versatile. Okay, I'm going to coin the next term. I'm going to call this climate battery air exchanger. So again, the Nebraska Oranges and the Snow guy brings in air underground outside that preheats the air to give the greenhouse fresh air and then exhaust it. So he's exchanging the air. So more of a benefit than heating is actually the air exchanging. So my problem in here is high humidity, which gives it a vapor pressure deficit. Now, what is a vapor pressure deficit? In layman's terms, vapor pressure deficit means the amount of drying power the air has upon a plant. Basically, it's how much moisture is being sucked out of the plant by the atmosphere. You probably already know that the plant uses transpiration to grow. Literally, the plant will die if it can't release moisture through its stomata. So in here, we have a vapor pressure deficit, and high humidity is our issue. So I need a big air exchanger. Knowing that, with the closed environment like this, I didn't know it was going to be that bad. So now I'm going to be integrating a big air exchanger. But what I would have done differently if I was to do it would be a climate battery air exchanger. So what it would be is taking Oranges in the Snow, Nebraska, which doesn't really work here because it's too cold, and a climate battery, which doesn't really work just for heating, but I would have integrated the two. So I would have excavated down just a couple feet or even 4 feet if I felt like it, and put in air tubes in an S pattern. So the climate battery, the air comes in from the hot side of the greenhouse, goes underground, whatever, 4 feet, in an S pattern, and they bring it out in the greenhouse. I would have done this S pattern and got rid of it outside. And then next to that, I would have had an intake and run parallel with that, those air tubes, and then brought it just in the greenhouse. So what that would do is you're taking hot air, hot humid air, you're heating the ground a little bit maybe, and it getting rid of that outside, and then getting the fresh air, which would have more carbon dioxide than my deficit in the greenhouse, and would be, you know, fresh air. I mean, that's not the proper term. It's in the greenhouse, my air is like too humid and too fresh. There's carbon dioxide deficiency in the closed environment and high humidity. So you come in here, you can breathe better. It's better for you. There's more oxygen, but it's hurting my plant growth. So outside there is more carbon dioxide and dry air, but it's in Saskatchewan minus 40 degrees Celsius, right? So that outside air is just a tube that intakes from outside and runs parallel. So 2 pipes next to one another, the hot air with the fan you're pumping out, and it would be a natural heat exchanger underground. The ground would, again, because I can't do this outside, it's too cold, the ground isn't warm enough. You'd have to dig too deep, and then you'd probably should insulate it if you were going to do the Nebraska guys concept. But here that doesn't work because it's too cold. It's literally like Mars. But if I did that, that would literally fix my vapor pressure deficit, humidity issue, and even carbon dioxide deficiency issue a little bit. For heating, it doesn't make enough difference, but instead of doing that outside, I can do that in my closed climate, so it would be like a massive air exchanger. Because I didn't do that now, I'm trying to decide how I do an air exchanger, if I just purchase a big commercial one, or I integrate air tubes insulated together somehow. So I'll exhaust greenhouse, or from the top of the greenhouse, hot air, run it in parallel through the air exchanger, run it outside, and then pull in fresh air and try to pre-warm it all winter long. All this stuff is used in the winter. In the summertime, where it's all opened up, you don't need any of it. So passive geothermal, that's one term I use, and cold climate air exchanger, I guess, or cold climate battery air exchanger. But anyways, so that's actually the answer. So not just a climate battery, not just the fresh air from outside, but you can integrate the two together, and it's not so much for heating and storing heat, like collecting it all summer and releasing it in the winter. That doesn't work as good as they say it does. That would help maybe a little bit with intraday, but it's more so super cold climate air exchanger battery integration. So I actually would have done that. So there's reasons why I didn't do the cold climate battery. There's reasons why I didn't take air from the outside, but thinking about it, if you ran parallel tubes together in that big S pattern, had a massive heat exchanger underground, that would fix a lot of my issues. So, okay, so still on geothermal. Geothermal doesn't work where I live. So Calgary, Alberta is a milder climate with more sunny days than we are. So in Saskatchewan, there's less sunny days and it's way colder. We don't have the Chinooks coming in to warm air on some days, blah, blah, blah. But I know some people with multi-million-dollar houses, and you walk in their geothermal mechanical room in their basement and it's just blinking lights and computers and expensive equipment, okay? I know people that install geothermal systems, so that's pipes that go way down underground or in a big area outside, and they put in this expensive system. It cost so much in electricity, it was significantly cheaper just to run natural gas. So after they lost all that money putting geothermal, they haven't used the system in 20 years. They just use natural gas because it's way cheaper. I had a consult with a geothermal company, pricing it out for my buildings to actually like drill down, deep drill and do a geothermal system, pump water underground, and they say you pull heat from the earth and stuff. And they told me that their air exchangers are so good that they can pull heat from a rock that's the temperature is minus 400 degrees Celsius. And I said, well, that's great, but how much electricity does that cost? And we factored it out for me. It would cost me to run that geothermal system and the electric heat exchangers and the pumps and everything. After you spend all the money on the expensive equipment, all of which that's going to screw up, it would have cost me $400 a month in electricity to run that geothermal system. Now, that heat exchanger, that's pretty cool. You can pull heat from a rock that's minus 400 degrees Celsius, but is it anywhere close to feasible? No, it isn't. Okay, so passive geothermal works. Super insulated, big footprint building, connected to the earth. It's passively, there's no pipes, there's no equipment, there's no moving parts, and it's free. Geothermal is a waste of money. There's a big arena close to me in a municipality. The government thought it was a good idea for the environment to put in over $1 million geothermal heating system in it. That geothermal system never worked from day one. After they put that in, they put natural gas boilers and furnaces because it doesn't work, and they essentially bankrupted the municipality for their stupid ideas. Now, if they had talked to somebody like me, I could have saved them $1 million and a lot of headache and actually built that building properly so it wouldn't even need a heating bill through natural passive geothermal and some passive solar technology and super insulation factors. But anyways, you can't fix stupid, whatever. Okay, water thermal mass. I did a few experiments. I did a water tower with IBC totes for my rainwater collection. That took up a lot of floor space, so I went back to my original plan. I put those up on heavy-duty pallet racking. Yes, the weight is good enough to hold all that water for what the pallet racking is weighted at. Yes, I should put a few extra parallel or maybe upper supports where I can, just as a little extra, because it is kind of eerie knowing that it weighs whatever it does, 20,000 pounds up on pallet racking at the back. I took my barrels out, my 45-gallon metal barrels I took out of the back of the greenhouse I had. Now, that worked, but it bothered me that it was using up a lot of valuable interior insulated floor space. And because I'm integrating fish into my system, I took all those barrels out, and now I have black fish tanks, or just two of them, one with the tilapia test, one with brook trout. But along the back of the greenhouse, on the concrete, is going to be black fish tanks, so I'm going to have more water storage. They're black, naturally heating up from the natural passive sunlight, and more thermal water storage than those barrels. And then I didn't have wasted space of using those barrels. Now I have usable fish tanks that produce something. So me, just with my super efficiency, it was worth it to get the rainwater collection up out of the way to not lose any floor space and get rid of those barrels and integrate them with fish tanks so it's usable. So yeah, water's the best heat transfer mechanism and the most versatile. So I am going to integrate in my in-floor heat with the solar evacuated tubes, and I can monkey around, heat fish water, monkey around, put a big insulated tank for thermal storage that I can pull from whenever I want or at night. So interday, I'm going to heat up water. At night, I'm going to pull that from water. I'm not the climate battery people that think that they're going to charge all summer and then have enough heat. They've proven themselves that that doesn't work where I live. So interday with water, the fastest heat transfer mechanism, is the best. Okay, that's a lot of talk on geothermal, that part of it, but it is very important. So those are a few things I would have done differently. So my main problems: vapor pressure deficit, high humidity, and storing that excess heat during the day for at night, and that's just more thermal mass, more water storage. And so those are some things that I would have done differently, and some things I still have to address. The bug problems, just very briefly, in the greenhouse. It's because of the vapor pressure deficit and high humidity in the greenhouse. Once I fix better conditions, so more carbon dioxide, which is plant food, less humidity, and that drier air mixing with my cold air, that's going to fix my environment better. So then when your environment's better, you're going to have less pest problems. But for pests, we do just a homemade insecticidal soap, introducing beneficial bugs. The only time that we have pest problems is when winter arrives and the greenhouse gets closed up and isn't open to the outside. Essentially when all the bugs die outside or hibernate or whatever, and we're in a closed-in environment, that's when we have pest problems I have to monitor and deal with. And then once we solve that, like in February, we have no more pest problems. So there's no aphids, no white flies, the odd little fruit fly here and there, but then the beneficial bugs like the ladybugs we introduced, you can find them on plants everywhere. So now my natural ecosystem equalized itself out because I used insecticidal soap, beneficial bugs and insects, and then just the time. So now it's February and no bug issues. So now I can plant a pepper and a tomato and not have aphid and whitefly and thing issues because we solved that problem. Okay, another thing I would have done different. My south end. So my south end is essentially 16-foot polycarbonate panels. So 8 mil twin wall polycarbonate on the outside of a 2x6 frame, and then on the inside is 6 mil UV resistant greenhouse poly. That is about the maximum for blocking out light that plants need. I couldn't do 2 layers of polycarbonate. I could only do 1 layer, and the poly, I couldn't do a triple wall polycarbonate and then a plastic because you do the math on it, the light transmission, it's not enough for plants to grow, so that's about the max. What I would have done differently is more of a integrated Chinese style greenhouse south end. And there's a few ways I could have done that. So if you're not familiar with the Chinese style greenhouse, it's just a clay back wall or an insulated back wall and then a low slope but it's a double frame. And on the top, there's 6 feet of airspace in between poly layers. So airspace is a great insulator, whereas I only have 6 inches of airspace in between. And then in between those double frames, they have a roller blanket that at night they roll down in between frames. So it protects the blanket from the elements on the outside as well as more airspace. So if I was to redo my front end, I would have spent a little bit extra time, did a double flip frame, and then possibly put that roller blanket in between, because once you have the double frame, you can do that. But more airspace is more insulation and it doesn't affect any light. So I would have lifted my greenhouse up a little bit more to the top of my roof instead of kind of the bottom of it. Future editor Dean just put in a clip of what I did. Now I used for my roof structure, I used I-beams off of a hotel that I got to save about $10,000 instead of buying trusses. If I had got vaulted trusses, I would have had way more space on the south end for the scissor trusses. And then, so if this is the truss end on the south end, I put my 2x6s at the bottom. I would have raised it up, put the 2x6s at the bottom, polycarbonate where it matters with the sun, and a piece of tin. And then in that space, I would have had a space to protect my roller blanket from the sun degrading it and protect it from the elements. And then I would have a bigger airspace because the inner frame would be what the insulated roller rolls down and in between the layers. So that's something I would have done different. So more spaces, more insulation, be able to protect that roller blanket for at night from the sun during the day and the elements outside, so it actually lasts. And that's my favorite thing about the Chinese style greenhouse is more airspace, double frame, and the roller in between. So I could integrate that into my end, and that is something I would have spent more time on and done differently.